Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into the origins and evolution of American government. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also the host of this discussion. And here he is, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome to a Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. Today is the 16th day of August in the year 2016, and everything is in flux here because this week, tomorrow, I believe, is the beginning of college classes, and we have a number of branches of institutions here, and so everything in the community is kind of on the move. Traffic's heavier, the stores are full, et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of an exciting time, and it's an absolutely gorgeous day today here in the southern West Virginia area. Right now we're in Beckley. It's a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesday, and I look forward to a 90-minute program today. We are, of course, abbreviated. We're beginning 1/2 hour later than we usually do on Mondays and Wednesdays. I do thank you for your continued support of the Virtual Center and of the Head On Radio Network, and I do encourage you to keep Bob Kincaid and the folks at Head On in your prayers and in your thoughts. And if you do find that you can afford to help out a little bit, I know that they will appreciate it. And remember, this network, which has been on now for better than 10 years, and this program, which has been on for more than 3, basically we run mainly on the basis of donations that the Head On Radio Network gets. None of us are on salary. We have equipment needs and licensing needs and all of those things which really are unforgiving when the first of the month comes, so to speak. And so anything that you can do, and I know that some of you out there are already doing everything you can, and you've kept us on the air for so long, and we appreciate it. I just want you to know that. We do look forward to hearing from you and encouraging you to become a more active participant in our programming. I know that Bob Kincaid's nightly program really solicits and depends on that kind of interaction, and over the years he's been able to build up quite a clientele. The nature of this program is a little bit different because we're basically looking at an awful lot of content. So by definition, an awful lot of what we do here in the afternoons on the Virtual Center is the presentation of information. And it requires, obviously, that much of the momentum for the program come from this end in your direction. And what I'm trying to find is ways to solicit more reversal of that and more momentum coming from your direction in this direction. Not so much for my benefit, but for the benefit of our other listeners as well. We do have a phone number, and if you do call this number, while we are on the air, we will get you on the air because the phone number will take you directly into the Head On Radio Network studios, and Agnes is there today, and she'll get you on the air. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. If you'd like to communicate with us via email, you can drop me an email, a personal one, and I will acknowledge receipt of your email and do everything I can do to get your thoughts and your ideas, suggestions, questions, whatever they might be, on the air, if it does seem appropriate. My email address is waobrien906 @gmail.com. waobrien, OBR, @gmail.com. And finally, I do encourage you to take a look at our Facebook page. If you are a regular user of Facebook, you know basically how to get on Facebook. It's very, very easy. If you type on your computer, your search engine, if you just type in facebook.com, you will be into the home page of Facebook. And at the top, you will see a search box. And if you type in the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution, you will be into our Facebook page. And on it are a number of postings that I've put there in previous months related to our program and related specifically to many of the subjects, many of the topics that we've dealt with here on the Virtual Center. In addition to that, if I see an article or a piece, publication somewhere that seems to be something that I think our listeners, those who follow us regularly, would be well advised to take a look at, I will post the link on Facebook and usually try to accompany it with a comment or a short paragraph or two explaining what the article's about and why I thought it was appropriate to put it on. These are opinion pieces. They are very interpretive usually, and so consequently they really warrant comment. Whether it's likes, dislikes, whether it's reaction against or support for, but they are, by definition, they are in the direction of provocating. And their purpose is to provoke the reader into agreement or disagreement or whatever. And we encourage you to feel comfortable using our access, our participation links, whether it be the phone number, whether it be an email to me, or whether it be the comments section on Facebook itself. But we do solicit your reaction and your support. I put a posting on Facebook this morning, earlier today, about today's program. It more or less is a transition from yesterday's program into today's program, because I envision today's program, especially since it's abbreviated, as a more or less a continuation of what we began to look at toward the end of our program yesterday. And if you'll recall, there were two themes or two issues that we dealt with in our last segment of our program, in the last 15, 20, 25 minutes of our program yesterday. The first one was on one particular facet of what I see, and I think a lot of people agree, as a conscious strategy on the part of Donald Trump and the Trump campaign. And that is laying the groundwork for refusing to accept the results of this November 8th election if it indeed results in a defeat for Donald Trump. Donald Trump has made the statement more than one time of late that if he doesn't get the victory, it's because the election was stolen from him, that the system is rigged in favor of his opponent, Hillary Clinton. And basically his thinking or his suggestion is, if we don't get it, given the enthusiasm that's out here in front of me at these rallies, if we don't get it, then it's because somehow, some way, somebody stole it from us. And we spent a little bit of time on that. And I'd like to begin our program today by referring back to that issue, because the more I thought of it at the end of the program, the more I realized how important it is. The second issue that we dealt with toward the end of our program yesterday was the issue of unions. And what led to it more directly is consideration of right-to-work legislation. I had made the point that West Virginia was indeed the 26th state to approve, to pass right-to-work. So what that means is that a majority of our states, now that we've reached the 26th state, the majority of the states in the union are right-to-work states. And there's no question that right-to-work is in significant part devoted to an attack on unions. And obviously the success of right-to-work suggests the success of this attack on the legitimacy and power of unions. And basically, what we were suggesting at the end of the program yesterday, and I'd like to return to today, rather early in our program, and spend the balance of our program today on this particular topic, is almost a classic example of the traditional idea, be careful what you wish for. Because in an article that appeared in late last week in the New York Times, I believe the date of the article it is August 12th, which was last Friday. The author of the article, whose name is Neil Gross, Gross, entitled his article, his op-ed piece in the New York Times, "The Decline of Union and the Rise of Trump." And basically what Mr. Gross introduces is a concept which I'd like to develop a little bit today. And it is that there is an inverse relationship between the decline of labor unions in this country and the rise of support for Donald Trump. So in a sense, we have kind of the ultimate irony here, because those people most responsible for the successful attack on unions are the people most afraid of this growing power and influence of Donald Trump. And if you connect the two, then it seems to me you have an absolutely delicious, delightful example of be careful what you wish for. Because the people that are most afraid of the Frankenstein they created are in essence responsible for it, because of the successful attack on unions. And what this does, it seems to me, is reflect the lack of understanding and appreciation for what unions have done and the role that they play in this particular republic. And I think it's time that we began to revisit and look very critically and carefully at unions, because most people assume that they are power grabs designed to deal in areas related to salaries, wages, benefits, and working conditions. That, in other words, they are self-interested groups whose principal purpose is to benefit their members, whether in fact what they do benefits society at large at all. That's the general impression of labor unions that most of us have. What Mr. Gross points out is that that particular very narrow approach to an appreciation of unions overlooks some of the very positive outcomes or effects that labor unions have on our society in general, on society, on the individuals who are members of our labor unions, on our political system, on the strength of our communities, on the political values that drive this particular group of people, working people in this country, and most specifically, and I think this is the link directly to the virtual center, is the impact that labor unions have on the idea of civic responsibility in the society. I think it goes unnoticed or unappreciated, but labor unions have been traditionally a major vehicle in our society for making our political system work. And the fact that we have reduced labor unions, their influence, their reputation, and the appreciation of them to the degree that has indeed been accomplished, we are beginning to see the results in the campaign of Donald Trump, in the support for him, in the nature of the population that supports him the most strongly, and in some of the behavior and some of the characteristics that are associated with the Trump campaign. The meanness, the bullying, the violence, the self-interest, the threats of violence, the threats to our political fabric itself. All of the things which those people who are most afraid of Donald Trump are most worried about are items or issues that labor unions over time have played a very, very positive role in, and it's gone unappreciated. I feel, and I'd like to devote a portion of our program today to it, I feel that it's well time, it's beyond time, that we revisit that subject and we begin to give labor unions their due. And again, I think probably the person who should get most credit for this is Neil Gross in this beautiful piece that appeared last Friday in the New York Times. This isn't my creation. It's a thesis or a theme developed by Mr. Neil Gross. And I'd like to develop it on today's program. I'd like to maybe add to it a little bit, if I can, because I think it's that good. I think it's that important and that worthy of consideration and appreciation by more people. And that's why I feel the need to do it. In fact, I pretty well made a decision over the last 12, 15 hours since we finished our program yesterday. The more I thought about this and the more I thought about today's program, the more I've made a decision that I also want to do some writing on this particular topic. And I will definitely make it a priority to give credit where credit is due, because Mr. Gross's article is really the source of this particular issue. It's something that I wouldn't have thought of, but the minute I saw it, things began to click, and I began to realize just how right it is. In fact, to be very honest with you, somebody I was talking to who listened to yesterday's program had made the comment that if anything, I think that Mr. Gross's piece doesn't even do justice to the particular subject. I think it's even more important than comes through in the Gross article. It's that significant given what's happening in our society. So that I'd like to get to later in our program. But first, I'd like to return to the issue of the Trump campaign and the threats of violence that seem to be associated with projections of a rigged campaign, of an election being stolen from Donald Trump. And I mentioned this yesterday, that there was, let me be very specific here, I don't want to mistake this. There is a short article that was printed on about 10 days ago, actually on August 3rd, in a digital publication called Crooks and Liars. And basically, the gist of the story was that the unofficial campaign manager of the Trump campaign, Roger Stone, who's been with Donald Trump for some time, we all know that Paul Manafort is managing his campaign. But Roger Stone's been there throughout. He's a key advisor to Donald Trump. He has been for some time. He's still there. He clearly has the Donald's ear. There's no question. And around the first of this month, Roger Stone gave an interview to Breitbart, which is the conservative right-wing publication that many of you have probably heard about. The actual author the person who conducted the interview is an individual named Milo Yiannopoulos. He's the one who did the interview with Roger Stone for Breitbart. And in that interview, Stone made clear that a key facet of the Trump campaign sip of coffee, excuse me. A key facet of the Trump campaign was going to be to lay the groundwork for this particular idea of a rigged election. And basically what he was advising Donald Trump to begin doing is to lay the groundwork for the fact that there are supporters of Hillary Clinton out there who are actively engaged in a process of stealing the election from him. And the example that Roger Stone gives in the interview comes from the state of Florida. And he uses that as an example. And he said, I think we have widespread voter fraud. But the first thing that Trump needs to do is to begin talking about it constantly. So there's two things here that Roger Stone is mentioning. One is the allegation of significant voter fraud, rigging the elections. That's the first thing. Stone says it's there. None of us have seen any evidence of this yet. In fact, and I mentioned this yesterday, if we've seen any voter fraud, it's in the pushing of legislation designed to minimize the turnout, to make it more difficult for certain groups of people who are most likely going to vote Democrat to vote, with voter ID laws and the shortening of early voting and many of the other things that have been passed in the states related to the election. There was a story, for example, in the primaries in, I believe it was Arizona, that the budget for actually manning the polls during the primaries had been cut so much that the number of polling places had been reduced significantly. There were fewer polls, fewer places to vote, even though the anticipation was that Donald Trump was going to be bringing out more voters. So the irony is that at a time when people expected a bigger turnout, the number of polling places was being cut substantially. The result was that there were huge lines, and it took many people several hours from standing in line before they got the chance to vote, if they indeed stayed there and were willing to wait. Many people just gave up and went home. Those seem to be the only examples of voter fraud that any of us see. And they're all designed to limit turnout, not to steal the election. So the fact of the matter is Roger Stone is alleging voter fraud, but he hasn't really given any evidence of it, at least as yet. But he claims definitively that it's there. The second part of this statement is not only is there voter fraud, but he is making the recommendation to Donald Trump that Trump begin to talk about it now constantly. In other words, lay the groundwork for the fact that there's fraud going on, and then if you lose the election, you've got something to refer back to explain the loss. Stone goes on. Trump needs to say, for example, today would be a good example, I'm leading in Florida. The polls all show it. If I lose Florida, we'll know that there's voter fraud. If there's voter fraud, this election will be illegitimate. The election winner will be illegitimate. We will have a constitutional crisis, widespread civil disobedience, and the government will no longer be the government. Stone is recommending that Trump begin to say this often, over and over again, so that when he alleges it after the votes are cast, people won't be surprised by it and demand evidence. In other words, what he's doing, what he's being advised to do, is lay the groundwork for voter fraud, because if you lay the groundwork successfully, you don't need evidence. All you need to do is point out that you've been constantly talking about the fact that it's going on. And the mere fact that you've talked about it becomes all the evidence you need. That's obviously a conscious political strategy that Roger Stone is recommending that the Trump campaign begin to employ. The other portion of this, the other piece of this particular story in this quotation from Roger Stone, is the civil disobedience and the violence that will result. In other words, this is a threat. This is a threat to society at large, that if Donald Trump doesn't win the election, we can expect violence and civil disobedience. I don't think anybody's going to doubt that or question it, because we've seen it at Trump rallies. We've seen that Donald Trump's campaign is attracting the kinds of people who don't shy away one whit from violence. We've seen it at the rallies, and Stone is predicting it big time if Trump were to lose the election. If that's not a threat, I don't know what is. Stone is recommending it in the interview with Breitbart that this become a key element in the Trump campaign. I think it's very significant, because what it suggests is that the Trump people are not going to accept defeat graciously. I was trying to come up with that word. I think graciously is probably as good a word as any to describe this. A key, and this is why I'm presenting this issue here at the Virtual Center. No question, a key ingredient, a key outcome, result of our two-party system as it has operated since it became fully developed in the early to mid-19th century prior to the Civil War. For the losing side to accept defeat and be willing to work with the winning side, to come together in a spirit of community, of cordiality, in a spirit of patriotism, and say, we're all in this together. We've got to do everything we can do to work together and make this government work for everybody. That's the kind of moderation that our two-party system has fostered. It's designed to produce it. That's been the strength of our two-party system, is its ability to, on the one hand, conduct campaigns, some of them becoming pretty heated, but when they're over, to make it possible for the two sides to come together and reach the kind of accord that allows the two-party system, the two parties, to work together in the interest of governing all the people. That's been a strength of America's two-party politics. What the Roger Stone quotation here suggests is that that tradition is not going to work this time. If Donald Trump loses, Stone is predicting violence and disobedience on a massive scale. Again, the threat of violence and civil disobedience in the face of defeat. He is laying the groundwork for what will accompany a Trump loss on November 8th. But more important than laying the groundwork for it, that groundwork becomes evidence. By beginning to lay the groundwork now, by beginning to talk about that now, what Stone is suggesting is that when you need it on November 8th, it'll be there, and you'll be able to say, I'm alleging voter fraud, but I'm not pulling this out of my back pocket. It's there. It's been there. I've made references to it all the way through the campaign, over and over again. In other words, the implication is I don't need evidence. All I need to do is point to the number of times I said it was happening. And if you refer back to it, it becomes strong enough precedent to constitute evidence, at least enough evidence in the minds of some people to justify the violence and the disobedience that accompanies it. This is frightening. In fact, last evening, a person called me who listened to yesterday's program and made reference to this and said, you're really stirring up a hornet's nest. You're really stirring up the mud there. This is pretty serious stuff. You bet your life it is. This is very serious stuff. And it seems to me we would be well to prepare for it and do whatever needs to be done in order to derail it, and derail it now. And it seems to me we're not talking about what the Hillary Clinton people must do after they win on November 8th. We're talking about what the leaders of the Republican Party must do right now to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen on November 8th. This threatens our republic. It basically threatens the political process all of us have grown up in, all of us believe in, and all of us are committed to. If this is allowed to continue until another 80, 95 days, 90 days until the election, the results are liable to be catastrophic. For the nation, yes, but for the long-term survival of our political republic, this aspect of the Trump camp of our political democracy and the leaders of the Republican Party who are finding ways to dance around the Trump campaign and try to talk out of both sides of their mouth at the same time, by on the one hand saying they don't agree what Trump is saying, about Muslims or about immigrants or about Mexicans or women or whatever, on and on and on, the number of things that he's done. These people somehow are able to say, on the one hand, they don't agree with what Trump is saying, but on the other hand, continue to support his candidacy. In other words, not willing to risk defeat in the election by abandoning Donald Trump. They're obviously caught in a box. It's too late to do anything about him. But on the other hand, they're frightened to death with him. And that seems to be the conundrum of the Republican leadership as we look at it today. But the fact of the matter is they are the only people who can derail this strategy. And again, it's not tied directly to the personality of Donald Trump, because he's not the one that's driving this. The Roger Stones, the people in his campaign, his advisors, they're the ones that are recommending this. Trump needs to put an end to this particular aspect of his campaign. And if he's unable or unwilling to do it, then the Republican leadership, the Paul Ryans and Mitch McConnells, need to step in and force him to do it, even if it means sacrificing the election and removing Donald Trump as candidate. They have got to do it. They have got to put the welfare of the Republic ahead of political victory in this fall's elections. I guess what I'm saying is that all the talk that we've done, all the articles we've read and referred to about the personality of Donald Trump, this facet of his personality, that facet, his narcissism, his bullying, his commitment to ignorance, his unwilling to even want to learn things he doesn't know that he should know, and on all of the things that we've talked about, become minor in the face of this particular facet of the Trump campaign. And let me share with you, before we go off this topic, one more Roger Stone quote from that particular interview with Breitbart. Because in this quote, he actually mentions the word bloodbath. He's not talking about violence in terms of yelling and screaming and chanting and marching. He's talking about something much worse. If you can't have an honest election, nothing else counts, Stone continued. I think he's got to put them on notice, Trump has got to put them on notice, that their inauguration will be a rhetorical. And when I mean civil disobedience, not violence, but it will be a bloodbath. The government will be shut down if they attempt to steal this and swear Hillary in. No, we will not stand for it. We will not stand for it, unquote. And Roger Stone is advocating that this is the position that Donald Trump has got to start laying out at his rallies and in his speeches. I didn't see it live, but I saw excerpts, tape versions of Trump's speech yesterday. And of course, what the pundits all say, and I watched the speech on tape, so I know what they speak. This was one of those where Trump stuck to the script. In other words, he read what other people had written for him to say. The New York Times editorial this morning takes the speech apart in terms of its content. A number of people that I've talked to have made comments how dull Donald Trump was. Donald Trump is dull. He's boring. Except when he goes off script. Except when he turns off the teleprompter and begins to speak extemporaneously. That's the part that people wait for and watch for because you never know what he's going to say or who he's going to insult or whatever. We talked about that yesterday. The fact of the matter is, this is what Roger Stone recommends that Donald Trump begin to talk about. It's something to watch for. I'm seeing all sorts of Trump comments about rigged election, about stealing the election. That part of it I've seen. The threat part of it, he hasn't really gotten into yet. The question is whether, in fact, he will. This is an incredibly important issue. It belongs here at the Virtual Center because of the threat to literally to the political process which makes this republic go. It is the most unpatriotic, unbelievable serious political strategy that I've seen come down the pike in a long time or that I've read about. This smacks of all the tales we've read about in our history books about Aaron Burr, the conspiracies of Aaron Burr, the fact that so much was happening behind the scenes that we didn't know about, that Aaron Burr was actually fomenting rebellion, that he was actually involved in a process of taking a portion of the United States and causing it to secede from the Union, and all of these other examples that we have in our history of efforts to destroy the Republic. This will do that if it's allowed to go on unaddressed. We can't let that happen. A small part of the story, but an important part, is the nature, the personality, and the psychology of the particular population that is most enamored with the candidacy of Donald Trump. His most avid supporters, who they are. As Donald Trump said in one of his speeches, I love the uneducated. Don't we love the uneducated? Why? A lot of critics of Donald Trump point to that statement about the uneducated as being significant and symbolic of who Trump is trying to go after. It's a campaign based on people who don't know, people who don't want to know. It's a campaign driven by frustration and anger and displacement. It's a form of rebellion. And this gets us into the second theme that I'd like to address in today's program. And that's the role of labor unions in our history. More specifically, the extent to which labor unions over time throughout our history have served to contain and control and redirect this particular sentiment into the political process and have made it respectable. Labor unions have performed a direct service to building civic responsibility within the populations of our society least inclined to be patriotic. There's absolutely no question that the people we're talking about, the people who are perpetrating the violence at the Trump campaigns, not necessarily the people who are instigating it, but the people who are participating in it, the people in the crowds who are comfortable with it. These are the people that were, when the United States, when America was an industrial society, a union-based industrial society, these were the people who formed the backbone of the industrial labor movement in this country. And it's unions who made them good citizens and active participants in the political process. It's unions who convinced them that by organizing and working together, they could not only improve their quality of life, but they could also get through the political process the kinds of concessions that would improve their standing in society. There's absolutely no question that the middle class, the vibrant middle class, which dominated this society in the mid-20th century, is a middle class that in large part was shaped by, created by, organized labor. These people, research tells us that these people individually are people who are inclined toward authoritarianism, toward the authoritarian personality. They are the kind that are most inclined toward violence. They are the kind whose behavior needs to be controlled and shaped. These are people that the system cannot afford to exclude, to ignore, to mistreat, to dismiss, to define as useless. In a society that technologically has moved so far beyond their ability to compete and participate in it because of the skills they lack, that they feel angry and frustrated and are inclined to lash out. These are the people that unions have contained and controlled and reshaped. These are the people that labor unions have educated into the positives of living in a free society, of experiencing and enjoying the freedoms of the right to organize, the right to assemble, the right to free speech, the right to free press, the right to organize, the right to vote, the right to have a say over the work, over their workplace, over the kind of work they do, and the safety of the conditions under which they work and under which they live. These are the people who believe that the society, the system itself, needs to provide for the safety and the opportunity of their children and grandchildren. These are the people who believe in the American dream, who believe that there's a shot, a fair shot available for everybody if they work hard, do their job, and play by the rules. All of this has become part and parcel of the message that labor unions deliver and the services that labor unions provide to working people in this country. And we have unwittingly, I don't think that this is by intent, I don't think this is planned, but unwittingly, unknowingly, we have set out to decimate labor unions because they threaten the bottom line of employers, because they don't fit into the worldview of corporate execs and corporation attorneys. These are the people who believe that the loss of jobs overseas, those corporations who have closed plants and laid off hundreds and thousands of people in this society and left them floundering, trying to find other jobs to replace them when there aren't any. All of this has come about with the attack on labor unions. And the epitome of that attack, the most visible example of that attack, is right to work. It is incendiary. It is insipid. It is disingenuous. It is dishonest. It is duplicitous. It is unfair. It's immoral. It's unethical. And damn it, it's legal. All the writing, all the arguments in favor of right to work. And here in West Virginia, we just passed it at the last session. Governor vetoed it. Legislature passed it over his veto. Of course, we have an interesting override policy procedure here in West Virginia. Usually, if a piece of legislation is vetoed, then the veto can only be overridden by a 2/3 or 3/4 vote in the legislature. Here in West Virginia, we have this stupid provision where if the law passes and the governor vetoes it, you can override the veto with the same vote that originally passed it. In other words, overriding a veto becomes almost automatic. The veto power in the hands of the governor of West Virginia is a joke. Pure and simple. Where do you think that comes from? Who do you think did that? It's that kind of legislation that is the product of corporate over-influence in this state, which has run it for the last 3/4 of a century. It was always coal. But oil and gas and timber and many of the other extractive corporate interests have moved in and raped this state for years. The only opposition that they had was organized labor. The UMW, the power of the UNW. And the history of labor violence in this state is well known throughout the world. Even the people today who most oppose unions will admit that when unions were born in this state, they were needed, they were justified, because working conditions were that bad. The treatment of working people was that bad. What many of these people argue, of course, is that now the situation has improved. So now we don't need the unions anymore. But the argument is, of course, that the unions became so powerful and so influential that they began to use their influence and their power for their benefit, their own benefit, for the benefit of their officers and their elected officials and all the rest of it. What they have done is make the case to the people of this state and people of other states as well that labor unions violate the American value system of individual freedom and opportunity. The argument is, in this society, free people ought not have to belong to a labor union in order to work. Your decision as to whether or not to belong to a labor union ought to be an independent decision. Your job shouldn't be contingent upon it. And the result is, little by little by little, this kind of organized, focused campaign turned public opinion against the value of labor. And let's be honest about it. Labor didn't do a good job responding. Because part of the campaign against labor was to perpetrate what is usually referred to as divide and conquer legislation or strategy. And what I mean by that is companies, corporations, employers were able to play off one group of workers against another, giving benefits to one group and not another, literally buying the complicity of one group of workers while they took aim at another group. And labor allowed itself to become victim of this game. Let me give you a contemporary example of what I'm talking about that's going on right now. The position advocated by Bernie Sanders to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. There's no way in the world that people working in fast food restaurants who would be the ones to benefit from a $15 an hour minimum wage. There's no way in the world that they can afford to actively pursue it. Because we don't have any jobs in the state. They'll be fired. They will risk their jobs if they become too vocal in their support of the increase in the minimum wage. And union members in this state allowed the issue to go pretty much unsupported. The successful unions in this state, although they're much smaller than they used to be, the UMW, engineers, and many of these other groups needed to get out there and support the increase of minimum wage for the benefit of fellow working people who needed it and were unable, because of the insecurity of their jobs, to pursue it for themselves. Labor needed to work together and stick together, and they didn't do it. Corporations and employers played that game for years successfully. And the result was gradually the ranks of organized labor began to shrink, as one group after another was defeated, in part because of the duplicity of fellow workers to do anything about it. Right to work is kind of the last straw. Because what right to work does is deny organized labor the fee that non-union members pay for being represented by the union. The way the law works is that if you are a non-union member but you work in a place where there are unions, if the unions negotiate for a pay increase or other benefits and win, you get the benefits even though you're not a member of the union. You're not paying dues. In reality, then, what that means is, even if you choose not to be a member of the union is required to represent you. And what they have been allowed to do is collect a fee from non-union members, which is a replacement for union dues since they aren't members. Right to work strikes that down, which means that labor unions continue to represent non-union members even though non-union members pay nothing for that representation. It stands to reason, then, that people who are in the union are going to say, why should I pay union dues when these guys I work with don't pay anything and they get the same benefits I do? So they'll stop paying union dues as well. And unions will ultimately go out of business. And that's really what right to work is all about. Those who support right to work argue otherwise. On the 12th of August, for example, Hoppy Kercheval wrote an article in the Daily Mail, which is a conservative newspaper here in West Virginia. And he makes the statement, whether right to work is good or bad public policy is a matter of debate. A majority of West Virginia lawmakers, as well as policymakers in 25 other states, believe right to work protects an employee who does not want to join a union and makes the state more attractive to business. Kercheval's argument is that becoming right to work, by passing right to work, West Virginia does two things. It protects the freedom of people who don't want to be in a union which requires them to pay dues or even fees. And because West Virginia is a right to work state, that's going to attract employers to come in here with jobs. It's going to increase the number of jobs. The reality is, it's going to increase the number of employers who will come in here because their goal is to exploit unorganized workers. Their job is to come in here because they can get away with paying low salaries, and the workers are not organized or able to do anything about it. What right to work has effectively done is create an indentured servant system in the state and in the other states that have it. But it's all done under the illusion of attracting jobs. The kind of employers and the kind of jobs that are going to come into this state are not the kind of jobs we want. It's not the kind of jobs that unemployed people want. We want jobs, but we want jobs which respect workers, which pay meaningful, fair wages, which provide benefits, retirement benefits, health care, which pay the kind of salaries and provide the kind of working conditions that workers will want to come to, will want to work in these places rather than have to. The hidden agenda for right to work is the additional weakening and final destruction of unions. That's really what right to work is all about. They don't call it right to work. But if you think about it, the very phrase right to work is deceptive. Because everybody believes that all people ought to have a right to work. That's not what this law is about. What its supporters label it as workplace freedom. Who can be opposed to freedom? Freedom in the work. Everybody wants people to be free. What they mean is people don't have to join unions. But what the reality is that because people don't have unions and because unions have become less and less viable, less and less significant, what that means is employers receive a lot more options. They don't have unions to deal with. They don't have organized labor. They don't have to worry about labor rights because there aren't any. Not only that, but all of the liability safety benefits that unions have garnered about the workplace and the employer's responsibility to provide a safe workplace and to protect and take care of workers. And of course, the kind of work here, working in the mines and stuff, very, very unsafe, very dangerous kind of work. All of those things go by the board because by definition, the end of unions and negotiated contracts means the end of employer liability. Employers aren't liable for anything. If you get hurt on the job, you got to deal with it. The employer is clear. That's another factor that makes right to work very attractive to employers and corporations. So the fact of the matter is, that's really a little bit of the story of what's happened in this society with the demise of labor unions. But now something else has happened as we enter our final 22 or 23 minutes of today's program. Something else has happened in this nation besides right to work. And that something else is Donald Trump. And that something else is the 10.7 million Republican votes that Donald Trump has received in primaries so far. What kind of people are voting for and making the most noise at Trump rallies? The very people that would be in labor unions if unions were still viable. And what did these people do when they were working on jobs and had the protection of union contracts? They organized campaigns to get out the vote. They educated working people on the kinds of legislation that would best benefit them. They educated people on the benefits and the value of a democratic society. They educated and made working people appreciate the value and the benefits of living and working in America, of being able to get ahead, to be promoted, to become a member of the middle class like no society in the history of the world had ever seen before. We saw coming out of World War II in the late 50s and 60s, reflected by legislation on the national level, like the VA bill, veterans benefits for education, low cost, low interest loans to buy a home. We saw working people in numbers that no society in the history of the world had ever seen before find it within their power, because of their jobs and their memberships in unions, to buy homes in the suburbs, to find ways to send their jobs to better schools, to educate their kids and get them into colleges when they never went, to expose their kids to the arts, to good literature, to theater, to dance, to culture, to the benefits of living in this kind of a society. All of that was part of the culture of working people in this society. It became the standard that the whole world looked up to and respected. It's what caused people to come from all over the world to this society for the opportunities that would be available to people. And we literally took out a gun and shot the messenger. We basically decided that we would cut off the head of the organizations that were making all of this work, because we were in a society where people began to believe that the number one priority was the priorities of shareholders, not workers. That what corporations had to do is be managed in the interests of the shareholders. The cost of the stock needed to go up. People's investments needed to go up. And the interest of shareholders began to take precedence over the issues of working people. The only way that that corporate America could get away with this was to decimate unions and was to perpetrate an organized campaign to educate the public against unions as being un-American, as being alien to freedom, alien to equal opportunity, and destructive of the people willing to work the hardest. Labor unions were challenged as defenders of the lazy, got the same salary, the same wage that you did, even though they did a terrible job. Labor unions made it possible for employers to get rid of non-productive, lazy people, alcoholics, and other people that should have been dismissed, but labor contracts made it impossible for them to get rid of these people. And over time, all of this campaign began to take. And ultimately, the ultimate weapon, the silver bullet, if you will, became right to work. In the process, what we did was turn loose the interests and the people that labor unions were controlling and shaping and educating for us. All of this ignored the positive civic responsibility benefits that organized labor played in this society. And we are paying the piper now in the person of Donald Trump. And the people who are responsible for it, Republican leaders funded by groups like Koch and the American Legislative Exchange Council and other corporate funded groups who have been key players in the right to work movement, in the effort to abolish minimum wage, keep down minimum wages, abolish prevailing wages legislation, and these other anti-worker types of legislation that we have seen many of our states pass in recent years. It would be laughable if it were funny. But I think what we saw in the first part of our program today is that this threat of violence and disruption of the American political process itself that the Trump campaign seems to be posing is anything but funny. We have unleashed a monster. In this political campaign. And the people who did it are the people who continue to try to win the election by refusing to disavow their support for the candidate, even though they insist that they don't agree with many of the things that the candidate is saying and doing. They're trying to have it both ways. And they can't. As powerful as the Trump campaign has been to this point, Donald Trump brags about the fact that he received more votes in the primaries than any other Republican candidate in history. And many of us take comfort in the fact that while he had enough votes to win the Republican primary, That kind of support's not enough to win the presidency. But wait a minute. We ain't done yet. Going all the way back to May, Thomas Edsall, one of the most astute political commentators that I've ever seen, who's regularly writing columns on the elections in the New York Times. They're absolute classics in terms of the research and the contacts that Thomas Edsall brings to the fore in these articles. On the 11th of May, Thomas Edsall wrote a column entitled, "How Many People Support Trump but Don't Want to Admit It?" Because let's face it, a lot of people are ashamed and embarrassed to admit that they like Donald Trump. And they're probably going to vote for Donald Trump. But they're not going to let anybody else know it, because then they would be in a position of having to justify why I'm voting for this guy that says all these horrendous things about Hispanics, about Muslims, about Mexicans, et cetera, about women, about heroes, about war heroes, about John McCain, about the Mexican female governor of New Mexico, about Kelly Ayotte, the Republican senator from New Hampshire, and on and on and on. Some of the horrendous things. I don't want to be associated with him. But the fact of the matter is, when I close that curtain, and there's nobody in that voting booth but me, nobody's going to know who I vote for. And the fact of the matter is, I don't like all these foreigners coming into this country. I don't like all these Mexicans coming into this country. I don't like these Muslims coming into this country. I don't like this violence that's going on and these mass killings and explosions and our troops going all over the world and getting killed and all this stuff. Donald Trump promises he's going to put an end to this. He's going to take care of it all. He's going to build a wall. He's going to do this. He's going to do that. He's going to basically take care of the problem before it ever gets to our shores, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I can't afford to go through all this rigmarole of trying to explain myself or defend myself. But nobody's going to know who I vote for. As early as May, Thomas Edsall began to see that there was a lot of evidence beginning to surface that a lot of the Trump support wouldn't begin to show itself until we got to the election itself. Even in May, Thomas Edsall could say, quote, "No one is more perplexed by Donald Trump than the leaders of the Republican Party." On May 5th, after Trump effectively clinched the Republican nomination, Paul Ryan famously asked, quote, "Does he share our values and our principles on limited government, the proper role of the executive, adherence to the Constitution?" As the Speaker of the Republican-dominated House, Edsall wrote, Ryan could have posed an even more difficult question. Do Republican voters share our values and our principles? The answer to this question, based on the 10.7 million votes cast for Trump in primaries and caucuses in the primaries, is no. These people don't buy into any of the values and principles that this nation is founded upon. But, Edsall says, that's not all. There's also strong evidence that most traditional public opinion surveys inadvertently hide a segment of Trump supporters. Many voters are reluctant to admit to a live interviewer that they back a candidate who has adopted such divisive positions. In matchups between Trump and Hillary Clinton, Trump does much better in polls conducted online, in which respondents click their answers on a computer screen, rather than person-to-person phone surveys. When you have to talk to somebody, to another person, you won't admit that you're going to vote for Donald Trump. But in an impersonal online survey, when it's just you and the computer, people are willing to click Trump when they aren't willing to admit Trump to somebody who calls them on the phone. We all know this from Twitter, from email. How many people have sent emails, and after they send it, they say, oh, geez, I don't know whether I should have sent that or not. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. And it's even worse with Twitter because it's so fast. People are sending out these things and then finding that they have to turn around and apologize for them. You'll say things to a computer that you won't say to another living person. And the research is beginning to suggest that this is true in polls asking who you're going to vote for in the fall. Real Clear Politics did 10 recent telephone polls. This is in May. And gave Clinton a 9-point lead over Trump. But the results of online polls, which rely on online surveys rather than phone surveys, only gave Clinton a 4-point advantage over Trump. This was in May. What that says is a lot of the support for Trump is not visible in these surveys, in this research that we're getting. The online search reveals it. The phone surveys do not, because people are embarrassed to admit that they are likely to vote for Donald Trump. So what that means is we don't really know how much support there is out there for Trump. Oh, all the polls are saying Hillary's running up leads. She's leading in Georgia. She's leading in North Carolina. There's a possibility that she could win Louisiana. The Democratic Party's able to basically looking to the possibility of winning back control in states that have been red for a long time. They're beginning to say winning back the Senate is a given for the Democrats. What they're after now, even though the Republicans have a huge lead, the Democratic victory in November is going to be so huge that maybe we even have a chance to retake the House. It's remote, but who knows? Because Trump is losing support everywhere, the polls tell us. What Edsall's telling us is that you can't trust these polls, because the fact of the matter is the people who support Trump, many of them will not admit it. In May 2015, Pew Research analyzed the differences between results derived from telephone polling and those from online internet polling. Pew determined that the biggest differences in answers elicited via these two survey modes were on questions in which social desirability bias, that is, the desire of respondents to avoid embarrassment and project a favorable image to others, played a role. When you had to openly acknowledge your preferences, you lied. But when you didn't, when it was just you and a computer or you and an iPhone, and you could be honest and nobody would know who you were, the results tended to be much more favorable toward Donald Trump. What this means is we may have unleashed a monster in this election cycle. Not the person of Trump. I'm not giving him credit for all this stuff. He's just the wind-up doll. He goes out there and does it. But the fact of the matter is, when you begin to seriously consider all the other factors associated with the Trump campaign, the demise of unions, the expansion of right to work, the kinds of legislation that states are feeling comfortable to pass now because opposition from organized labor and other groups is gone. It seems to me all of us need to seriously wonder whether, in fact, we're in for the surprise of surprises come this fall. What I worry about is this republic. I worry about the survival of our society. What we are seeing here with this attack is self-interest run wild, not among the people who are supporters of Trump, but in those corporate educated executives at a level that ought to know better, who are participating in a campaign which is destroying the basic glue that holds this social fabric together. Basically, these people have unleashed the Trump campaign upon us. They have unleashed all the worst aspects upon us. And they don't even know it. And that's why I think today's program is so important. If nothing else, it's a clarion call. It's a horn, it's an alarm signal, which says, hey guys, you better look seriously at what the hell you're doing and what you've done. Because while you acknowledge openly that you're worried about Donald Trump and worried about many of the things he says, the fact of the matter is you've done it. You're the one that's responsible for it. The only problem is all of us are going to end up paying for it. And likely, if things run true to form, those people who are most responsible for it will find ways to shield themselves from the results. I think that this may be one of the most important programs that we've ever done here in the Virtual Center. We have our regular 2-hour program tomorrow, Wednesday. We'll be back at our regular start time, which will be 1 p.m. in the Eastern Daylight Time. We'll begin the program with a short review of this because I do think it's that important. I want to go back and look at some of the research on unions and the role that unions have played in the past that kind of makes it clear exactly some of the things that we've done and how dangerous this might be. I don't think it's too late. But I think the first thing we need to do is acknowledge that we've got a problem and acknowledge the mistakes that we've made on things like right to work. I'm running for candidate, and one of the things I want to do is get in a legislature which votes down right to work, which rescinds it, and which takes this state out of that column and restores a bit of sanity to our political system. I think it's that serious. It's 59 minutes after the hour. We've reached the end of our program today. I want to thank you for tuning in. I hope I wasn't too negative. I hope I like to be a bit engaging. I think if this stuff is not engaging, it's deadly. But on the other hand, by being engaging, I hope I didn't depress anybody or whatever. I think that, scholastically, academically, I think this is interesting stuff. I hope you agree. Thank you very much for being with us. I hope you'll be back again tomorrow. I want to thank you for your attention and thank you for your continued support of this program and of the Head On Radio Network. Thank you very much, and God willing, we'll see you tomorrow, same time, same station. Thank you.